RJ-517, do you want to report a UFO? Over.
Negative. We don't want to report.
Look, it wasn't my worst Wednesday night.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another edition of Anomaly-NOW. I'm your host, Miles Lewis. We are transmitting to you from Austin, Texas. It is Wednesday, March 11th, 2026. This is the weekly news and media roundup for the nonprofit 501c3 Scientific Anomaly Institute, aka the Anomaly Archives. Thank you for joining us, whether you are watching this as it streams for the first time at 7 p.m., typically Central Standard Time, Northern Hemisphere. This is the video version, and then we, of course, put out an audio-only version. So depending upon your preferences, you can use whatever podcatcher you like, or you can stream via YouTube or Spotify or Spreaker or Headliner or whatever. Those are the main ones we distribute through. Let's get started. Tons of stuff. We are so excited. We hope you'll go to our website, anomalyarchives.org, and you can find out all about our 501c3 nonprofit activities, our growing preservation archives of over 7,000 books, thousands of periodicals and digital files. And of course, we have a Patreon where you can experience a monthly live online lecture with our wonderful Seekers of the Strange. We recently had Jack Hunter, a paranormally oriented anthropologist, and coming up this, let's get that up there. Coming up this March 21st, Saturday, March 21st is going to be our good friend Zelia Edgar. And you can go over to patreon.com/anomalyarchives. And over there, you can find out how to join for free. Or if you are willing to donate $10 a month, you can be one of the participants in our monthly live Anomaly Academy lecture series. This month's presentation, as I said, is Zelia Edgar. She is presenting If Coincidences Are Just Coincidences, the element of perfect timing in high strangeness encounters. That's right, folks. That's going to be Saturday, March 21st at 7 p.m. And she describes this lecture thusly. A boy's two friends walk off, leaving him alone with his dog. At that moment, a flying saucer appears over his location. A young couple driving down a desolate road stops the car to fix the windshield. Out of the dark, a faceless thing approaches. A night watchman hangs his head, trying to ignore the strange object in the sky. He glances up just in time to see it zoom frightfully close to his location. At that moment, suddenly, just in time and again, experiencers of anomalies just happen to be in the right place at the perfect time, leading to the question, would these events occur without the observer, or do they occur because of the observer? Put simply, if a Bigfoot knocked in the forest but no one was around to hear it, would it exist? I love Zelia's wonderful Just Another Tinfoil Hat series on her YouTube channel. Always encourage folks to check out her stuff. She just is very much a storyteller interested in picking out the very strangest high strangeness, close encounter, cryptid, monster, weird cases, encounters with the bizarre, and bringing attention to those things that don't fit the classic ETH, extraterrestrial hypothesis, trying to explain UFO encounters. So that's coming up soon. Hope you'll join us for that. Meanwhile, you can go over to our Flipboard and check out all the amazing news articles and links there. Tons of stuff. We're going to try to hone in on just a couple of things here today. And unlike the last couple of episodes, I got to keep it under an hour. I gotta try harder. But there is so much. There's just so much. We can never get to all of it. So I did want to call y'all's attention to our good friends over at The Observer. They have this wonderful website, theobservermagazine.substack.com, and you can, if you write to them, you can find out about getting your own copies, physical copies of The Observer print magazine. Yes, that's right, folks. The Observer is put out in print. Pretty freaking cool. Just got these in the mail. Thank you, team over at The Observer. It's so neat. These have printed articles, versions of stuff that is on their website, but which also I believe includes stuff that may not be on the website. Anyway, it's as we've so often said, it is such a nice experience to experience physical media, materials in the physical medium. So please check them out. Again, that's theobservermagazine.substack.com. And they've got a bunch of great articles over there right now. The Ringmakers Parts 1 and 2, as well as We Spoke with the Pope, Spielberg's Suspicions, We've Met the ETs and They Are Us, Peeping Paracon, and so much more. Go check them out. We highly encourage you to do so. Now, I'm going to immediately go into, I'm going to just make sure this works properly. So pardon my reinitiating this. But yes, we've been reporting a lot on the issue of the Havana syndrome. And of course, my interest in this goes back a long time, but you've got to check out this 27-minute segment of the latest 60 Minutes. Havana syndrome investigation is, quote, a massive CIA cover-up. That's right, folks. Here is just a brief intro to that 27-minute episode.
Tonight, we have details of a classified U.S. intelligence mission that has obtained a previously unknown weapon that may finally unlock a mystery. Since at least 2016, U.S. diplomats, spies, and military officers have suffered crippling brain injuries. They've told of being hit by an overwhelming force, damaging their vision, hearing, sense of balance, and cognition. But the government has doubted their stories. They've been called delusional. Well, now 60 Minutes has learned that a weapon that can inflict these injuries was obtained overseas and secretly tested on animals on a U.S. military base. We've investigated this mystery for 9 years. This is our fourth story, called Targeting Americans. Despite official government doubt, we never stopped reporting because of the haunting stories we heard, like this.
The very first incident occurred in August of 2020, and what it felt like was that someone punched me in the throat and my left ear was clogged, and I started to get sharp shooting pains going down my left arm.
Chris and Heidi asked us not to use their last name.
Sorry, folks, had my microphone muted. There are so many witnesses, experiencers, victims, survivors of this that are encapsulated in this episode. The gist is as we have reported, there have been conflicting reports from the government saying it's all just mass delusion, that there's no evidence of such a weapon. And even if there was a weapon, it would require such a massive power source as to be unsustainable, that it would have to be like the power source would have to be carried in a large van. Well, this report does a really good job of elucidating that and also bringing attention to the fact that, as we have reported, there are reports that the United States government purchased a device on the black market that allegedly originated from the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, Russia, whatever you want to call it. And the implications are that the CIA at some point did engage in a cover-up, either just through wanting to cover its own butt or just not wanting to call attention to. There's a lot of good segments in this, and I don't have them all perfectly queued up, but here is one of the research scientists speaking about this.
Seizures to memory lapses, inability to concentrate, headaches, intense pressure, pain, disorientation, difficulty with balance. Many of the things that we heard about from victims of Havana syndrome.
The Russians had been doing experiments in this area decades ago?
Decades ago, yes.
So again, here the implication is that it's the Russians and bad boys. They've been doing this research for decades. We'll get to that in just a bit. But then there is this whistleblower who has come forward, ex-CIA, who says he left because out of disgust for what he was witnessing inside the investigation of these cases and how horrifically disregarded the suffering of the victims was.
He is speaking tonight for the first time. In 2021, he volunteered to work on the CIA's investigation because of the suffering he'd seen among CIA officers and their families overseas.
I mean, these were my colleagues, these were my friends, these were people I had worked with, and I saw lives that were destroyed, careers were ruined, people's kids were affected. They have lifelong developmental issues. People now are even still having cognitive issues and having all types of secondary effects years and years later. it became an emotional topic for me because I saw this happening and I volunteered to work in the AHI unit and I wanted to make a difference.
He joined the so-called AHI investigation at CIA headquarters. AHI because the government calls the cases not attacks, but anomalous health incidents. He expected to dig into whether a foreign adversary, a so-called state actor, was behind this, but it didn't go that way.
He proceeds to describe just again how much disregard there was and how it really became clear the effort was not to get to the bottom of it, not to get to the truth, not to punish the guilty or to at least point the finger at the guilty, but to basically dismiss it all and write it off and get the public to move on. Now, again, this is to me so old hat. Obviously this has really been a big deal over the last several years. Later on, they go on to say that the Biden administration met with these individuals and some of the victims and expressed to them basically that they were sorry. They've now realized there was in fact something going on. I'm not sure if I can find that bit here, but yeah, that is pretty significant development.
Dug in opinions going back years about the plausibility of a non-thermal microwave mechanism. In fact, when we began our work, we were briefed by their experts and told nothing in the scientific literature will support the idea that microwave energy can do things like this.
They had made up their minds.
It seems they had. And it almost seems as though consistency was more important than objectivity.
One is that
Retired CIA officer Mark Polymeropoulos was in that White House meeting.
And so what the Biden administration was telling us is that something had changed. New intelligence had come in. Now, I don't have a security clearance, and this was an unclassified meeting, so they could not put forward that this was based on new intelligence, but it was clear to me that that's what they were insinuating.
Dr. Paul Friedrichs brought a message to the meeting. He's a retired major general, formerly one of the Pentagon's top doctors.
He said very clearly, I'm sorry. I want to apologize to you. I've never seen in 30 plus years of practicing military medicine victims treated in such a terrible manner. And I just want to offer my apologies to you.
What did that mean to you?
I have chills now thinking about it. I had chills then. It was an indication that at least some people in the Biden administration and the Biden White House believed us.
Any American would be embarrassed if you were to see how these people have been treated and then to be dismissed this way as malingerers or people who are manufacturing things for some other purpose. It's insulting.
Our sources tell us that the Biden White House wrote a public statement backing the victims, but never released it. So far, the Trump administration has not changed the words in the 2023 intelligence assessment that it is very unlikely the victims were attacked.
So, yeah, to me, this is, I'm sure for some people this is shocking. Sadly, if you're a purveyor of the worst aspects of American history and government malfeasance, this is not surprising, sadly. Now, I just want to move on and just again point out this is nothing new. This is why it's these kinds of the rumors of these kinds of technologies and the known scientific investigation of them that led me to found a zine in the 1990s called ELF Infested Spaces, ELF Infested Spaces, a play on Terence McKenna's ELF Infested Spaces phrase from his description of psychedelics as a realm in which there are elves, the DMT elves, and other seemingly alien non-human intelligences, these various conscious beings that you can interact with. Obviously, that's a controversial idea, but I called it ELF Infested Spaces, Journal of Possible Paradigms, not the new paradigm, because of all the rumors of mind control technologies involving alleged manipulation of ELF, extremely low frequency radio waves and electromagnetic energy as part of both explanations for psychic phenomena as some people had long attempted to investigate telepathy and anomalous cognition, ESP, psi, as somehow using a mechanistic old style radio wave technology analogy of extremely low frequency radio waves. And there may be something to that, but more likely is that electromagnetics can either enhance or dampen these abilities in humans. Again, if there's anything to this idea of not microtubules in the human brain being the source of our experiencing of consciousness and our ability to then tap into the non-local informational fields that is the real reality that we're enmeshed in, then perhaps electromagnetics are just, the static in the channel that can either be thinner or thicker and make better or worse our reception of them. It's an old TV analogy, obviously, or radio analogy. But anyway, back in the 90s, when I was publishing that journal, ELFIS, ELFIS, Elf Infested Spaces, I had a whole section called Mind Control Corner, MKC, with control being with a K to mimic MK Ultra. Well, as you can see here from the Internet Archives, this is the cover page, old Internet edition of ELFIS, issue number 8 from the winter 1998 edition. And if you scroll down into the MKC corner section, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And one of the things we often reported on was people who committed crimes, often violent, murderous mayhem, because they believed that they were being harassed by either aliens or the government through some kind of electromagnetic harassment or mind control. But we also tried to link to some of the verified scientific literature investigating the effects of electromagnetic energies on human physiology, whether it be biological processes or consciousness of perceptual processes. And one of the things I so often refer people to are these two documents. This fantastic one, Bibliography on the Psychoactivity of Electromagnetic Fields. This was, I think, brought to my attention by Magazine, a wonderful zine from back in the day, from circa 1986, which features open literature, bibliography of electromagnetic field physio-consciousness effects references by Robert C. Beck. So there's Bob Beck and Robert C. Beck. I believe these are two different people. It's very confusing. But yeah, as I noted here, the first time I saw this bibliography, albeit in a previous incarnation, it was attached to a document purporting to be titled Extreme Low Frequency Magnetic Fields and EEG Entrainment, a Psychotronic Warfare Possibility, a preliminary research report published September 1977. So again, this is something that alternative news, alternative media, alternative science, fringe science, UFO, New Age people have been ranting about, researching and publishing about for decades. And what they were focusing on was, yes, there is always some Soviet-Russian component to this, but as with anything like this, there's also always an American component. And you can say, oh, well, we did it because we had to combat what they were doing. This whole, the Koreans were doing brainwashing, so we had to start doing MK Ultra. Maybe. Nonetheless, we are likely as guilty, and I say we in the country sense of our the powers and principalities that we have little or no control over, the military-industrial complex. Now, one of those links goes to this online version from back in 2001, the bibliography. Let me enlarge that for you. On the Psychoactivity of Electromagnetic Fields by Robert C. Beck and Eldon Bird. And yeah, this, I'm remembering correctly, so if you search for microwave, wrong page. If you search for microwave, you'll get a lot of references. I think on this page alone, there's 58 references. And some of those papers include titles like Histological and Histochemical Effects of Microwave Irradiation on the Central Nervous System of Rabbits and Guinea Pigs from PhysMed publication, EEG and Morphological Investigations upon Influence of Microwaves on Central Nervous System from the ACTA Physiology publication, Experimental and Encephalographic Studies of Microwave Effects on the Nervous System, or some of these other ones. And yes, Microwave Energy Distribution Measurements in Proximity to Man and Their Practical Application, National or New York Academy of Sciences, this is 1975. exposure of man to low-intensity magnetic fields in a coil system. Oh, look where that one happened. Pensacola, Florida. Naval Aerospace Medical Institute, circa 1967. Later there'd be a bunch of UFO sightings there. Just a coincidence. Exposure of man to magnetic fields alternating at extremely low frequencies. Same Naval Air Station, or no, is that a different one? NAMRL. Study of the effect of electromagnetic fields upon, I don't know, Drosophila melanogaster. I don't know what that is. But again, you see all these examples of microwave effects on animals and human physiology going back to the 1970s. Of course, this bibliography came out in like the late 70s, early 80s. Low power radio frequency and microwave effects on human electroencephalogram and behavior. Yeah, it just goes on and on and on. And, you know, some of this, and of course, this classic, the zapping of America, microwaves, their deadly risk, and the cover-up circa 1977. This is the kind of stuff that I was seeing early on that made me go, you know, if you look at UFO close encounters in the context of quote-unquote non-lethal weapons research, which very often involved the use of psychoacoustic sonic weapons, sonic technologies, or microwave or energy-based technologies. It was all about either, you know, inflicting pain to disperse crowds or affecting people's mental state to make them disoriented or to literally make them freeze in their tracks. There were tons of reports about what was described as a Soviet system called LIDA, LIDA, that allegedly, and you can imagine you would have to flip it on remotely or with a long cable outside the range of its effects. But this LIDA device, LIDA, LIDA device was alleged to be able to induce sleep in anybody within the effective range of the electromagnetic field of this device. Can you imagine being able to surreptitiously make your enemy go to sleep? I mean, if this was real, you know all governments would want to do it, no matter the risks to people's health. Now, other things I linked to is back in the day, Glenn Campbell, the desert rat, who was one of the enthusiasts out at Area 51. He was one of the first people to really popularize Area 51. He used to have a wonderful website called UFOmind, UFOMIND, ufomind.com. It was the earliest version of Wikipedia I was aware of. And I was so enamored with it. I was one of the participants where you could create an account and you could add information to the pages there. And of course, the pages I loved to adjust the most were the ones on MK Ultra and related sub-projects, as well as Earthlights and geologically created luminous phenomena. And those were places that I was dumping a lot of this research, as were a number of other people. But thankfully, unfortunately, despite its unfortunately being gone now and Glenn Campbell having passed on as well, the Internet Archive, archive.org, still has links to these old versions of it. And yeah, so you can still go to those, but that's some of the things that we were linking to back then, as well as pages for the Department of Energy and their, at the time, of course, believe this was during the Clinton administration, all this information was coming out about, yes, all these different horrific experiments that were done on pregnant women, children, all kinds of people to test the effects of radiation and radioactive materials. It's just, again, more examples of the terrible things that were done on American citizens, usually often without their consent or knowledge. Some of the other things that we carried were, as I mentioned in that same issue 8 of ELTHIS, this extreme low frequency magnetic fields and EEG entrainment, a psychotronic warfare possibility ? Preliminary research report, September 1977, by Robert C. Beck, Biomedical Research Associates, Los Angeles. And the summary of the intro to this document says, recent well-documented research suggests that between 25% and 75% of human and animal subjects exhibit psychophysiological sensitivity to magnetic and electrical fields in the extreme low frequency ELF ranges corresponding to brainwave spectra. Neuronal synchronization, desynchronization, and brainwave entrainment can be demonstrated clinically in cats, monkeys, and human sensitives in the presence of ELF oscillations of both natural and man-made signals, including pulse-modulated radio frequency carriers. There is additional evidence that the naturally occurring Earth ionosphere cavity oscillations, known since 1952 as the Schumann resonance, can affect moods, states of consciousness, psychological stress, and health cycles of all life forms. Prior to 1975 or 76, the Soviets began transmitting pulsed electromagnetic signals over broad frequency ranges of sufficient power levels to disrupt lawful radio communications globally. Fundamental frequencies of the higher harmonics, as well as the pulse repetition rates, yada, yada, yada. In other words, he and others were sounding the alarm that governments were investigating these things and actively doing them on populations. That was the intro to this actual preliminary research report, which is much longer. I'll try to put the link to this in there. But really, it's that bibliography that I showed a minute ago that was published over on vxm.com, 21st link, that I find fascinating. Again, this is all much older information. You've got to wonder where all this research went after. Now, fast forward to where we are now, and there's so much paranoia. There's a pretty good article, though it's, of course, very dismissive of all the conspiracy information, and rightly so. Most conspiracy theories are just fear-mongering, bogus BS. TheAtlantic.com for The Atlantic Magazine has this article: the weather-changing conspiracy theory that will never end. Why are some people convinced that nefarious experiments are happening in the distant Alaskan wilderness? This, as so often happens, this website has done multiple versions of the title. This is the one that got saved over at archive.ph, not affiliated with archive.org, as far as I know. It's this website that folks are using to archive the unpaywalled versions of paywalled content, which I should put up the fair use for educational purposes. You ticker again. But this is a pretty comprehensive article from March of this year that documents this journalist, Caitlin Tiffany, going up to Alaska, being shown in the HAARP facility, HAARP, which I believe stands for High Altitude Auroral Research Project. Apparently that name's about to change, as the land it's on out in the middle of nowhere was, I believe, indigenous native population land that was seized or was purchased under the threat of eminent domain seizure, and I think has either been returned, but, oh yes, here we go. With each, towards the end of the article says, with each passing year, HAARP is divorced a little further from its military past. Decades ago, the Air Force purchased the land surrounding the facility from the Atna people under the threat of eminent domain, but it has recently sold it back. HAARP will soon be renamed the Subaurora Geophysical Observatory, or SAGO, SAGO, matching the name of its NSF grant. Quote, there is a side benefit that it helps us transition off of the name that drives conspiracy, Matthews added. Now, this article also mentions that one of the earliest books that really harped on the conspiratorial angle to this antenna array that has been described as an atmospheric heater. It says, this article says, a member of the maintenance team walked me through the HAARP power plant as he turned on its 5 generators labeled Angel 1, Angel 2, et cetera, and Angel 5. The current staff doesn't know who named them, but it was clearly in reference to the 1995 book, Angels Don't Play This HAARP, HAARP, co-authored by Nick Begich Jr., a member of a prominent political family in Alaska. His son, Nick Begich III, is the state's current representative in Congress. Among other things, the book suggested that HAARP would, quote, boil the upper atmosphere, unquote, with radiation that would then bounce back to Earth and, quote, penetrate our bodies, the ground, and the oceans, unquote. And its publication instigated many of the early conspiracy theories. Now, I'm not going to vouch for that book, but they are correct. It is definitely one of the initial sources. But there's been a number of books, including one by a researcher who has since passed away, that me and Mac White had on as a guest when we were talking about weather modification conspiracies, and HAARP has long played a role in those conspiracy theories. And, you know, the thing about HAARP, there's all these potential uses for it that have been alleged, but they typically get dismissed by the people who you would think would be in the know and better able to assess their reliability and feasibility. And I want to believe them. And I do think that there are so many legitimate scientific research projects that to the layperson or the paranoid like myself come off as suspect. But I do feel like inevitably I see enough information that makes me question the feasibility of some of the conspiracy theories towards the suspicion that they are in fact possible. Now, this article mentions that I believe the Navy and the Air Force both searching the wrong page again. Yeah, okay. The article says the Navy hoped to use the facility to work out new forms of long-range communication, and the Air Force wanted to study quote-unquote killer electrons that sometimes damage satellites. But their interest in these pursuits ran out, and the military turned the facility over to the university in 2015 rather than bulldoze it. David Heisel, an engineering professor at Cornell, who has conducted experiments there, told me that the most succinct way to summarize what HAARP now studies is, quote, the effects that the ionosphere has on signals on radio wave propagation, unquote, which is not very exciting. The equipment looks crazy, but it can't affect the parts of the atmosphere where the Earth weather is created. Now, it's one of the things that I remember hearing that made me suspect this is or was one of the main reasons for researching it is what they're saying here, communications, radio wave propagation. And some of the more sensationalistic conspiracy speculations was that this technology could be used to heat portions of the atmosphere and basically create an ionic spheric haze or some kind of static, basically a shield that would only be penetrated by the people generating that static because they would have the key to unlock portions of it to allow through their selected communications. This seems like the exact kind of thing that our military or any military would love to do, whether it was just over a battlefield or potentially the entire planet. Yes, it sounds a bit like some silly sci-fi or horror movie plot, but it's been a long time since I looked at this, so maybe it's completely unrealistic and I'm just, perpetuating old rehashed conspiracy theories. But this was something that it seemed likely to me to be able to do, that if you had enough of these, you could create a global or at least continental wide staticky atmosphere that only your communications encryption keys would be able to allow your military and government's communications through, whereas your enemy and everybody else would not be able to penetrate or get their communication. All right. Well, anyway, you can go read the article for yourself and then you can do the research for yourself. Nice little graphic here with lightning and a radio antenna propagating waves, lots of all-seeing eyes in the skies, and lightning bolts, flying saucers, and tornadoes on the Earth, because of course it's the weather conspiracies they were focusing on. Oh, that does remind me. I did want this. We've reported on how some deranged individuals and, dare I say, militia groups have been targeting weather radars because of their belief that they're somehow manipulating the weather. Here is an example that they cite in this article of similar scary plans by armed individuals. Quote, whereas some of the calls that Matthews fields about HAARP are a bit funny, she often hears from people asking for nice weather on their wedding day. Other calls are alarming. HAARP once received a bomb threat just before dozens of college students were set to show up for a week-long program. The FBI investigated and found that the suspect was not in the state. And in October 2016, 2 men were arrested in Georgia with thousands of rounds of ammunition and numerous guns, including AR-15s, en route to HAARP to attack it. Those men got nowhere close to HAARP and seemingly had no good plan to cross the border into Canada. Still, HAARP's security advisor, Sean McGee, the former head of the university police, called it, quote, a bit of an eye-opener, unquote. All right, now moving right along to some fun, more interesting, silly UFO stuff. Over at podcastufo.com is this one by UFO history buff and author Charles Lear. This has always fascinated me. The supposed connection between cattle mutilations and UFOs. And it is pretty weird and startling to learn that one of the earliest alleged cases goes back to the late 1800s and involves someone whose name ends with last name Hamilton. An 1897 cattle mutilation. This is, of course, over at podcastufo.com. And I love this illustration. I've seen this before. I love this illustration of that more or less encapsulates this specific alleged case. The article begins, the cattle mutilation mystery and its association with UFO activity didn't get the attention of researcher investigators until the 1970s. There is an article on page 2 of the March 1975 APRO Bulletin, headlined, quote, "More on Mutilations," unquote, discussing the findings of APRO field investigators Bill Pitt, Lee Spiegel, and Kevin Randall. It was the opinion of APRO at the time that, quote, "no satisfactory evidence has emerged which links UFOs to mutilated animals," unquote. The first mutilation to get the public's attention, okay, they go on and describe the San Luis Valley, Colorado, 1967 Snippy the horse incident. But then they jump to, shortly after that, in his article in the July-August 1968 Flying Saucer Review, headlined, quote, "West Virginia's enigmatic bird," John Keel mentions that cow and horse mutilations are, quote, "not now common," unquote, in the midst of sightings of the Mothman and UFOs in the area around Point Pleasant. However, there is a report far earlier than this that by most accounts appeared in the April 23rd, 1897 Yates Center Farmers Advocate. This involves a mystery airship caught in the act of abducting a cow right in front of prominent Woodson County, Kansas citizen Alexander Hamilton, not the one on the $20 bill. While the Advocate article remains elusive, Reddit user so-and-so found an article in what appears to be the Globe Democrat that includes the details of a references the Advocate article. Now, this is something that actually was debunked quite some time ago, but like so many things, it gets lost in the memory hole, recapitulated, and because some great researchers, in my estimation, included it in their books years ago. You can go to this article here at podcastufo.com and read more about the details, but the part I really want to focus on is the debunking of it. So the article says, this story got widespread public exposure thanks to Frank Edwards' best-selling 1966 book, Flying Saucer Serious Business, and Jacques Vallée included it in his 1965 book, Anatomy of a Phenomenon, and his 1969 book, Passport to Magonia. It seems, however, that the story was a hoax, and how this was discovered is told in detail by Jerome Clark in his article headlined The Great Airship Hoax, published in the February 1977 issue of Fate magazine. So again, this has been debunked as far back as 1977, but it still gets referenced. People come across it and think, oh my gosh, here's seemingly some real early evidence of cattle mutilations connected to quote-unquote UFOs, at least the phantom airships, which of course, many people believe that the airship stories were just, again, sensationalistic journalistic hoaxes on the part of newspaper journalists. According to Clark, quote, the truth about the affair came out in an article published in the January 28th, 1943 Kansas newspaper, the Buffalo Enterprise. A week before, the paper had recounted Hamilton's original tale, and this prompted Ed F. Hudson, who had been the editor of the Farmer's Advocate in 1897, to write a letter to the Enterprise. According to Hudson, he had just installed a small gasoline engine to replace hand power on his quote-unquote old country Campbell press, and invited friends, including Hamilton, to watch it operate. Hudson explains the origin of the story. Hamilton exclaimed, "Now they can fly," hence the airship story that we made up, unquote. Clark says the Enterprise article was discovered in 1976 by an American correspondent of Fortean Times editor J.M. Ricard. Ricard sent Clark a copy, and Clark got a letter seeking confirmation published in the September 16th, 1976 Yates Center News. This got a reply from Donna Stevie of Wichita, Kansas, who said that her 93-year-old mother, Ethel L. Shaw, had heard the story from Hamilton himself. Shaw provided Clark with a statement. And basically, yes, they say it's a hoax and that it was all part of a quote-unquote liars club type of situation. Anyway, besides you being able to read the article, you can also play an audio version of it as well over there at Podcast UFO. That's fun. Meanwhile, over at Kentucky.com, oh my goodness, Lexington Herald Leader at Kentucky.com, 150 years later, meat falls from the sky again in this Kentucky county. Oh my goodness. More than 600 people watched the skies over Bath County late Saturday afternoon as tiny bits of meat fell to the ground. When they landed, onlookers strolled down the hill of Tom Byron's property to retrieve them. The event was the closing ceremony of the Kentucky Meat Shower Festival, which commemorated the strange events of March 3rd, 1876, in the nearby Bath County town of Olympia Springs. What fell that day on the property of Ms. Rebecca Crouch, some accounts say one piece landed on her face before she raced inside her home with her grandson, may never be known. What's for certain is the source was far different and much less sanitary than the 1,876 mini meat sticks dropped by a small plane Saturday. The bits of grass-fed beef were packaged in plastic, with each end serving as a helicopter blade of sorts to ensure no one lost an eye. The consensus about the 1876 Kentucky meat shower? One member of a kettle of vultures approaching the Crouch property high above was startled and, as they are prone to do, regurgitated a recent meal. Other members, as they are also prone to do, followed suit. Saturday's festival in the county seat of Owingsville began at noon in the courthouse square and featured food trucks offering various mystery meat concoctions and a series of games like a bologna roll-off, meat tosses, think egg tosses, and paper airplane called Vultures by festival director Ian Corbin throw-offs. Transylvania University professor Kurt Goad, G-O-H-D-E, brought what's believed to be the final piece of meat from the 1876 meat shower for well-attended presentations in the Bath County History Museum. So we've reported on this before. It's just so silly and so Fortean after Charles Fort and his publication of, among other anomalous type of events, rains of strange material from the sky, whether they be stones, frogs, fish, or mystery meats. Goad said DNA testing on the small chunk of meat several years ago was inconclusive because it was too contaminated, but suggested a possible meal for at least one vulture. Quote, the longest strain of DNA there was closest to goat, Goad said. Next to Goad was a mannequin portraying Rebecca Crouch with her right arm raised to the sky as if she was welcoming rather than dodging the next chunk of tissue. Anyway, there's more to that article that you can read over at Kentucky.com. I'm just so tickled by this. But some other interesting news links that we're not going to get to. Redated skulls in China suggest Homo erectus spread faster or earlier than thought. Another headline, mysterious stone structures in northern Quebec's wilderness sparked debate over Canada's ancient past. And along similar lines, archaeologists found proof of a Viking city that was supposed to be mythical. These headlines are available over at haaretz.com, thedebrief.org, and popularmechanics.com. There's a bunch of other news links as well, as usual, over at our Flipboard. We hope you'll take the time to go check that out. And please like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Hit the notification bell. Please join us at our Patreon. Go to patreon.com/anomalyarchives, and you can sign up for free, or you can donate $1, $2, $5, $10 or more a month. All amounts help. Or you can just donate by sending a check to our P.O. box or using PayPal. We do also have a Venmo. I haven't put that up anywhere, but just reach out to us at contact@anomalyarchives.org or use the other contact modalities, the P.O. box, phone number, etc. We'd love to hear from you, but thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting us. We hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you next week. Oh, and remember, coming up, we've got Zelia Edgar, Coincidences Are Just Coincidences, the element of perfect timing and high strangeness encounters. We hope you'll join us for that and our many other upcoming Anomaly Academy monthly lectures. Thank you. Sayonara.